Welcome to episode 55 of the Forward for 50 podcast, where we interview people over 50 who are pursuing new direction for their lives. It's an opportunity for men and women to tell their stories their way in their own words. I'm Greg Gerber, the founder of Forward for 50 and your host for today's show. Today I'm interviewing a woman from Pennsylvania who is diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. It's a crippling disease that eventually confined her to a motorized wheelchair and required a service dog to help her with basic tasks. Yet through the ordeal, she saw God working in her life, and today she has a sense of purpose to help others see God moving in their lives, regardless of the circumstances. Joan Patterson lives in York County, Pennsylvania, which isn't too far from Harrisburg. One day she felt a numbness in the left side of her face, similar to what people experience when Novocaine wears off after a trip to the dentist. Doctors felt she had a pinched nerve, so she was ordered to rest in bed for a while. But when her left arm went numb a short time later, Joan knew she had a problem. Being left-handed, she needed to figure out what was wrong and quickly. That began a 1-year odyssey to try to diagnose the problem. Even though many of the tests suggested Joan was suffering from multiple sclerosis, the MRI tests showed her brain was clear, so doctors ruled out that disease. But in 1989, a specialist was able to diagnose the problem even though she had not had a flare-up. 2 years later, Joan couldn't sit up straight while attending a church service one day. Eventually, her condition worsened to the point she needed assistance to walk and eventually required the help of a service dog to retrieve items and turn on lights or to help her enjoy a sense of independence. To tell us her scary but inspirational story and how it impacted her life, please welcome Joan Patterson to the show. Thanks for joining me today, Joan. I really appreciate your time. So tell me when you were first diagnosed with MS. How old were you and what led to that diagnosis?
I started with the left side of my face feeling like I went to the dentist and it didn't totally wake up.
Okay.
The doctor said, "Oh, you have a pinched nerve." So I got to lay in some kind of contraption in the bed a couple times a day. What I liked about it was I got to actually relax for a little bit, but it wasn't doing anything. And then sometime later, my left arm joined in and it became numb the same way.
That would have been scary.
It was. Because it wasn't totally numb. If you put one of your limbs in an awkward position, then it wasn't like that. It was just partial. And I am left-handed. So I really noticed it. Once I told the doctor that, he said, "That's not a pinched nerve." And that began about a 1-year odyssey on trying to figure out what was causing it. And I had MRIs. I got to the point where I felt I could almost verbatim say what the doctor was going to tell me, because they did an MRI of my brain. They actually found one up there, and they'd look at it, have me do some things with my arms and that, and then they'd say, "You have all the symptoms and signs of MS, but you can't have it because your MRI is clear. You're supposed to have like lesions on the brain." And I went a year. It just got more and more scary, stressful, because I had no idea what this was. At that time, we had an MS office here in York. She talked me into going to Hershey to see a doctor up there. I was reluctant, but I went. I got an intern. 3 guesses and the first 2 don't count, what he told me. Same thing. You have all the signs and symptoms, but you don't have it. Your MRI is clear. She talked me in then to go back one more time, and she said she was going to make sure that I got to see the head doctor.
Okay.
So he came in, had me do some things with my arms and legs and things, and he said, "You have MS. You didn't look at my MRI." No, I don't use MRIs. They're not conclusive.
Interesting.
He said, "You have MS, you just have not had an exacerbation," in other words, a flare-up of it. So that was 1989. 1991, I had my first major flare-up. That was scary. We were sitting in church, and I noticed that I was starting to slump forward. So I tried to sit up, and I couldn't. It took my husband and another gentleman to actually get me out to the car. And that's when we went to the doctor, and he said, "Yes, this is an exacerbation."
Wow.
And that thus began my life of living with a neurological disease.
Were you over 50 at that time?
I think I was 40s,
Okay,
in my
in your
40s.
40s.
It wasn't quite there yet.
Okay.
So once I was diagnosed, I actually got better for a while because the stress was gone. And I felt so much better knowing what I was fighting. And the fatigue is also big, very big with that. So dealing with the numbness, fatigue, that was not so bad. And I was teaching at the time. The principal knew about my MS. Of course, my family did. And none of the students knew. Until one day I woke up, and when I went to take a step, I almost fell. My left foot no longer would lift. When you're walking, you don't even think of it,
Right.
that your foot actually lifts to come forward. Mine decided it was too tired to lift. So I ended up dragging my foot around all day until I could get to the doctor. Yes, that was not a total flare-up. It was, but definitely a sign.
Right. What were you
So
teaching at the time?
Yes. Yes.
What
So
were you teaching?
What was I teaching?
Yeah.
High school business classes.
Oh,
So instead of standing, we got a projector, and your whole time we used to have the plastic and you put it, yes. That's how I taught. I would sit and teach.
Okay.
So they were wonderful at accommodating my needs.
How long were you able to teach before you had to give that up?
Well, let's see, 89, and then high school, I left in 91, and then I taught at a business school for 3 years. That was when my first major one happened, that I couldn't get up.
Okay.
That was a huge turning point in our family because our oldest son was away at college. Our youngest son was a junior in high school. It was basketball season, and he was co-captain. I was still working. So every day he would carry me to the car, take me to work, drive to school, after school, come back and get me, carry me into the house, and then go back to school for basketball practice.
Wow.
And my husband couldn't help out because he had fallen, and when he landed on a nail, ended up that it actually went into his bone.
Ouch.
But the doctor didn't know it at that time. So he was basically tied to an IV pole for 6 weeks. He couldn't do anything. So the whole house rested on our youngest son.
Wow. How many kids do you have?
2.
2 boys?
We have 2 boys and 6 grandchildren. And that one night, they had finished their regular basketball season, and they were in the playoffs. He came home. He said, "Mom, Dad, I have something to tell you. I want you to hear it from me before you hear it from anybody else." I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what did you do? You know, a mother, okay,
Exactly.
You got in trouble. But no, he said, "I quit basketball tonight." "You can't." "Yes, I can." "No, you're in the playoffs. You're co-captain." He looked at me and he said, "Mom, I can't quit school. I can't quit taking care of you and Dad, but I can quit basketball."
Wow. What a mature decision to make for a teenager.
At that time, it hit me just how limiting my MS was.
Wow.
Because each time you have an exacerbation, at least my kind that I had, I don't get the whole way back.
Just gets progressively worse
Yeah.
every time. So you
Every time.
2 steps forward, 1 step back, but you never go all the way back.
Right.
Okay. Wow.
So I started out with a quad cane because when I had the drop foot, then I got a brace that started on the bottom of my foot the whole way up right behind my toes and ran to the back of my knee. Now, I was naive because I had a drop foot. The brace was to help hold the foot, but I asked the man that formed that if there would be a hinge. No, but how do I wear high-heeled shoes? You don't.
Wow.
That was another time, a big turning point for me, because in that day and age, you wore high-heeled shoes when you went to church, anything.
Mm.
Right before I got the brace, we had a business fair at our church. It was part of my student grade. They had to take a business to follow them, how they got set up and all that. And the night that it was take place, my foot was still dragging, but I had to look professional. So I put on my high-heeled shoes and I did what they call furniture walking. I walked from table to table. My husband came up and told me I needed to change shoes. I can't. Yes, you can. No, I need to be an example for the students. I need to look professional. You don't look professional stumbling along the table. So I went to the back room and put on my old scuffed school shoes. But I wrapped my high-heeled shoes in the tissue paper that I kept them in so that they would not get scuffed. And I thought, scuffed from life.
Mm.
I was shielding them. But as I put them in there, it was like a casket because that was a sign of femininity at that time.
Wow.
And that really hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So when the doctor said there would be no hinge, I would be relegated to the flat, scuffy shoes.
Okay. But you could still walk at that point.
I could still walk at that time yet.
Okay.
So I went to a quad cane because you get a good impression of a drunk. Balance isn't real good. I used a quad cane. Now, our sons were both home at that time, and they weren't going to let me just, how should I put it, wallow in what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Quad cane is made that the main part of it goes straight down, and then 2 legs are off to the side to help balance. You can use it either in your right hand or left hand. Just depends which way you have to turn it for the legs to be the correct position. Without me looking, they would turn it the opposite direction when I stood up and went to walk. My cane wasn't correct, and I was in a manual chair at the time. We were in the parking lot at church. My oldest son was pushing me. The parking lot was on an angle. He said, "Mom, what would you do if I'd let go?" "I trust you. You'd either stop me or you wouldn't let go." And all of a sudden, as I'm talking, I hear the flop, 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 flop. He had let go.
Oh, my goodness.
And he was trying to catch up to me, and I couldn't stop it. It started to go faster and faster down the parking lot. At the end of the parking lot, there was about a 20-foot drop-off. He did catch up to me.
Thank goodness.
Yes. That, I think, showed him that, yeah, you can play with it, but you got to be careful how you play.
Mm-hmm.
I went from the quad cane then to a scooter, a 3-wheeled scooter, I felt, hey, a lot of people use scooters. That was no problem. And vocational rehab paid to have looked like a little crane in the back of my station wagon so I could load that in and take it out when I got to work or whatever. So that was nice. Continued to get more fatigued each flare up. I was fine with the scooter. After 2 scooters wearing out, they came with another scooter. The physical therapist that fits you, came with a scooter. She also had a power wheelchair. Side note, they're power chairs, not electric chairs. I'm not particularly fond of electric chairs. That has
Good point. I'm now catching on to what you're talking about. Yes.
She wanted me to sit in the chair, and I want a scooter. Being a physical therapist, she was seeing more in my body than I was.
Right.
She just sit in it. That's all you need to do. Then we'll write up for another scooter. I sat in it. As soon as I sat down, I looked at her and I said, why didn't you bring this after my first one died? She said, I did, Joan, but you weren't ready yet.
Oh.
And that's a whole big part of any kind of disability. You have to learn how to deal with it. And it was around that time that I realized that my MS was actually God's gift to me.
And why was that?
Because if I didn't have MS, I wouldn't have the relationship that I do with God. It's by grace. There's so many things that He has shown Himself so faithful that I would not be aware of things when I call people like you walkie-talkies. And when you're up and walking around and you're busy, you don't notice things. When you're somebody like me that has to slow down, I can't do everything I used to do. But now I see life from a whole different perspective.
I can imagine.
So you look at things, you have time to look at things because life is slower.
Forcing you to slow down.
Yes. And I chuckle sometimes that I see things that walkie-talkies don't see because I'm so short now.
Good point.
I do. My husband and I were out in the kitchen not long ago, and he said, look, out there, I forget, I think it was a hawk sitting in a tree. I said, honey, I can't see. What's right there? Honey, I can't see that far down. And then I told him how far I could see. He goes, oh, you can't. But it just, no.
Yeah. How old were you when you went full-time into the chair? Had you crossed 50 yet?
It's been 16, 17 years.
Okay.
Because this one, I've had 6 years, and my first one, I had 11 years. Okay. I had to get a new one because they told me they couldn't get parts for the old one.
I can imagine. I would imagine that would be a big life-changing moment for you to have to fully rely on a powered chair.
Yes. Because now I couldn't just pick up my chair and put it in the back of the station wagon. And these chairs weigh almost 400 pounds because they have 2 boat batteries, lead gel batteries.
Does that mean you need a special van to be able to haul those?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
And that's, once I was in the chair, that meant I had to get a special van, a ramp van. And this is when God did a number. My parents said, you need a van. We'll put the down payment on it.
They're not cheap.
They're not cheap. No. I have a 20 Toyota Sienna. And when we have to buy the vehicle, But vocational rehab, if you're working, will pay for all the modifications.
So you were still working at that point?
I had not been, but then I did get a job for a while
Okay.
until COVID
Of
hired
course.
me. But when I drove this van off the lot, I was driving a $160,000 van.
Incredible. That's just
Um,
almost criminal, really, when you think about it.
and a lot of it is labor.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, they have to take the floor out and they drop it 10 inches, put the ramp in. Now that's pretty universal. But for me then, my driver's seat had to come back so I could transfer, and it turns, it goes up and down. So you've got a major modification on the driver's seat. And when they're doing it, they make the floor so that if I get to the point where I can't drive, I can drive from my wheelchair. Just take the seat out.
Okay.
And the fact that I'm driving is an answer to a prayer that I only prayed in my spirit. As I started to get weak and my limbs started to get weak, I just voiced to God in my mind, let me continue to be able to drive. Because at that time, I didn't know there was all special things. And to this day, my right leg is my strongest limb.
And you can still drive?
I can still drive.
That's got to give you a lot of independence. Or
Yes,
some
it does.
independence, yes.
No, a lot of independence,
Okay.
really. Yeah. Now, my arms are weak, so they have to install special steering. If you take the wheel of your vehicle and put it down like a plate, that's how I steer.
So it's very similar to the way you see the bus drivers sometimes, the way they were
Yes.
driving.
Yes.
Okay.
But it's solid, and then they have a tripod. And I put my wrist in that, and then so I don't have to hold on to it.
Mm-hmm.
And it has zero resistance steering, meaning that when you want to change directions, you have to be very careful because a little turn sends it off in another direction.
You can't sneeze, can you?
No. My husband had told me that he had driven probably over 1,000 different vehicles. And he said my van was the hardest.
Wow.
Learn to drive.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. You're going 65 down a road and you want to miss a pothole. You just tiny bit, or else you're in the next lane.
When did you get your helper to assist you day to day?
He was my next answer to prayer. Okay. For a number of years, every time I would have a flare-up, the physical therapist would say, you need a service animal or you need a service dog. And I can't. My husband's allergic to dogs. You can get a monkey. And I said, I'm already a circus. I don't need to solidify it with a monkey. Or I could get a miniature horse. And it's what do you do? Feed them little bales and have a stall? Right. Actually, I found out later that miniature horses are used, and they can still, under ADA, be used as a service animal. They are small enough that they eat dog food.
Okay.
And that's that they're pretty much like an oversized dog. But I wasn't about to do that either. So we just limped along until my husband told me when he came home from his yearly checkup that he was no longer allergic to dogs.
A God thing.
But where did my mind go? I grew up with a little Chihuahua lap dog. So I was ready to get a lap dog. He was raised with dogs, but they were outside. Dogs are not meant to come in the house.
That's what he thought, yes.
So I just gave up getting a dog. Then I started to see all kinds of articles and demonstrations and that for service dogs. And okay, God, you're telling me I need to check into this. So we went to a over 50 expo. Walking past the booths and that, I came across one where there was a lady sitting in the exact same type of chair that I have. And right beside her was a white, full-size poodle, sound asleep with all this commotion. So we talked. She told me what all he did, and she also has MS. So by the time we left that night, I had filled out the application to get a service dog from Canine Partners for Life. Okay. I went down for an interview, and they started to ask me, to me, it seemed like silly questions. She asked me which hand is my strongest that I use. My right hand, if I want the strength. My left hand, if I need the coordination. And I thought, what does that have to do with a dog? She also asked me what I like to do in my downtime. I'm relegating to reading. That's about it. Okay. What does that have to do with a service dog? So I found out later, but after we had the interview, she said, it will be anywhere between 6 and 18 months till you get a dog. And and on the way home, having a discussion with God, wait a minute, I finally give in. I understand you want me to get a service dog. Now you're telling me to wait? Patience is not one of my virtues. And with my MS, the way they had their trainings, their 3-week training classes scheduled, I would have had to wait almost 18 months. So I just was so disappointed. One day I went, okay, God, I understand. You're in control. And the next day I would be, God, I'm waiting. I'm being obedient. And then out of the blue, a couple months later, I got a phone call from CPL. We have a dog unexpectedly available that might work for you. Would you be interested? Yes. We'd like you to come down and meet the dog. I had no idea why I needed to meet the dog. Service dog? I had nothing to go on. What was I supposed to look for? Whatever.
I would imagine they asked all those questions because the dog had to be trained to do things to respond to either your right side or your left side.
Exactly.
Yes.
Because they're trained to work on the left side, the heel side. And when I got down there, I was ushered into a room, and this trainer came in with this black lab that sat down in front of her facing me, and she had the silliest little grin on her face, just as if, I know something you don't know. And the trainer said the words that will forever be etched in my mind as God answering prayers. This is the dog we think will work for you. Her name is Faith.
Oh.
And that just, to me, God used everything but neon lights to tell me this was my dog.
That's wonderful.
Now, whoever that was supposed to go to just so happened they couldn't take it at that time. Wonder why God did that. And her name being Faith, they are named at birth. So 2 years it takes them to train them. So 2 years before I said okay to God, and my husband was no longer allergic to dogs, she was born and being trained to be my dog.
That's amazing. From the beginning of time, that was planned.
Yep. And it just astounds me. And that's one of the things with my MS. Things like that.
Mm-hmm.
God is constantly saying, I know what I'm doing.
And so what are some of the things that Faith would do for you?
She would pick up objects off the floor. She could pick up an earring back.
Really?
Yes.
And,
And so can my new one.
and
Yep.
did I hear you say earlier before we started recording this that she would turn on lights for you as well?
Yes.
Okay.
She would turn light switches on, turn them off.
Mm-hmm.
She would lift the foot plates on my chair so I could transfer easier. Then when I was back in the chair, she'd put them back down.
That's amazing that a dog could do that.
It's mine that she would open drawers and doors in my kitchen. And this one that I have now, if you open it, boy, he's right there ready to close it. If you close it, oh, do I get the evil eye?
Oh, that's sweet that they do that. Do the cabinets and the drawers have to be specially modified with different handles to be able to facilitate the dog opening and closing?
No, the doors, that's easy. They just close them that way. But I have long, like a shoelace
Mm-hmm.
on every knob. And he takes a hold of the shoelace and pulls it.
Okay. Very
And
good.
then he'll close it. The biggest thing that both of them I've trained them to do is to detect latex.
Okay.
The night of 9/11, that evening before, my husband and I were sitting here in the living room, and all of a sudden I broke out in a rash, itchy rash head to toe. I was just miserable scratching. And he said, "You're going to the hospital. You're having an allergic reaction." Okay. We had no idea what it was. They gave me the drugs for an allergic reaction, and we didn't get home till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, so he didn't go to work. But my parents came because they had to check on their daughter. And when I woke up and walked into the living room, it was just in time to see the second plane go into the tower.
Wow.
That's how I remember it. And just like my MS keep getting worse, every time you have a latex encounter, it gets worse.
Okay.
So it used to be just touching it, and I'd break out in hives. Then I decided to teach Faith how to detect latex.
How do you do that? How do you train a dog to do something like that?
First of all, I have to do it outside.
Okay.
But my husband had a U.S. Marshal that did a program at his school, how it was a explosives dog. We were corrected. They're not bomb dogs because they sniff out more than bombs. So I asked him, "How do you do this?" And it was pretty much the same way that we teach them any skill. We started out with 3 things: latex gloves, balloons, and a piece of a new car tire. Because whenever one of our vehicles gets new tires, it has to sit outside away from the house for about 2 weeks. So we put them, I have to do it with a friend because I can't get near it or touch it. So they would hold it, and I'd have her go to it. As soon as she got to it, I'd tell her to latex sit, and eventually she caught on. Now, she was a black Labrador and what do retrievers do?
Bring you things you don't want them to bring you.
Exact. And for 2 years, she had been trained to bring things to me. Now she had to be trained, don't even touch it. Because if her nose touched it and then she touched me, I would react.
Wow.
And I could see the light bulb go on because one day I sent her latex and she ran over and she stopped dead. Instead of reaching down, picking it up, it's like the light bulb came on in her little head. She sat down and looked at me. From then on, she had it.
That's neat. You must develop a wonderful relationship with the service animals.
She and I worked together for 10 years. out of that 10 years, we were only separated about 9 hours.
Wow.
When I was on the ventilator because of a latex reaction, she was with me there in the ICU. The nurses told me later that she was so in tune with me that she would get up and walk as far as her leash would allow her and stand there and look at the nurses, and they knew that something had changed in my body without even looking at the monitors.
Wow.
That just blew me away.
I was going to ask if that's one of the things that a service animal can do, is to go find help if you have a problem. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And the IV, when the bag would get empty, that alarm goes off. They only could allow that one time. She got so upset they couldn't let it run empty anymore.
That's fun.
And both of them are trained that if I need somebody, I'll tell them, go get daddy or whoever's in the house. And it used to be that she would just go out to them. One time our oldest son and his family was here. I had fallen in the bedroom. So I sent her to go get daddy. She went out to him, but they were all in their own conversation. And after I sent her out about 3 times, our oldest son said, I think we better check on Mom. So now I've trained both of them to, when they get to the person, that they bump them with their nose. And as soon as they get bumped, they'll know, whoever it is, they know I need them and they come.
That's an interesting way to do it. And so it's just, the dog might show up in the family room or the living room someday while everybody's watching TV, just because the dog is wandering through the house. But if the dog comes up and bumps somebody, they know that you need them and they get up and go get that,
Yes.
give you the help you need.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yep. They are so smart. We were told the first night of training, congratulations, you have made the commitment to be married to a 2-year-old for the rest of your life.
Oh.
And that's about it. They are so smart.
Do you ever have a problem keeping them focused and on target and doing
I
what you
did
do?
with Faith.
Okay.
She was a special dog. She would do the command before I had the whole thing out of my mouth.
Okay.
Now, him, I give him the command and he just, do I really want to do this?
He's a male.
Yes.
Right.
You said that. Yes. So yeah, your question, I'm not sure if I answered your question.
You did. You wrote a book about your experience in being diagnosed and having to deal with MS and the role that your service animal played in all of that. Why don't you describe your book?
Okay. The book is called A Matter of Faith, Surviving Life's Crises with 4 Wheels, 4 Paws, and a Loving God.
Oh, I love the title.
It's a compilation of stories, the different adventures that we had. Just the one that pops in my head is at the beginning of our talk, I mentioned about being close to the Susquehanna River. My husband and I had gone up to a park that overlooks the river. And when they are not in an enclosed area, they have to be tethered. I hooked a rope, one end on her, and I thought, where am I going to tie the other end? We're in the middle of a grassy field at the top of a hill. I weigh a whole lot more than she does, so I just tied the other end around my waist. I'm throwing the ball, we're having a good time, and I thought, you know what, Faith? Wonder how far this, or how long this rope really is. Well, it was about the next throw or two when she decided to find out herself. She went to catch it, and it bounced off her nose. It landed on the grass. Remember I said we were on a hill. She made sure that physics was still with us. It was still correct because something in motion stays in motion.
Mm-hmm.
something going downhill picks up speed. So she takes off for all her worth after this ball rolling down the hill. The next thing I knew, I was flying through the air with the greatest of ease and landed on all fours. Not a good Olympic landing. I rolled over and I laid there and I laughed. Didn't get hurt because I was in grass. But I laughed and laughed. And she just loved it because now Mom was on her level. So she wanted to lick and love. And my husband comes racing. Are you okay? Are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay.
Oh, that's neat.
It shows that I did not have her connected to a firm foundation. What are we connecting our lives to?
Very good point.
Sand? Or are we connected to the rock, Christ Jesus? So that was very evident that we need to be anchored
I was going
to
to
a
say,
firm foundation.
a lot of people in your situation who were healthy and were then stricken with MS or some other kind of disease, I would think would often blame God for their predicament. But for you, it drew you closer to him. How is that?
Yeah. Yes. Early on, I had to make a choice. Would I accept this as a gift from him and follow in obedience with what he wanted me to do? Or am I going to have a lifelong pity party with me and God? How could you let this happen? And get more angry at God.
Mm-hmm.
All getting angry at God does is make you more bitter.
Right.
And you end up in a worse shape than what you could be. I learned to accept it. Now, I'm not saying every day oh, thank you, God. There's days where when I see people doing something, just walking along, especially a couple holding hands on a walk. We do, but it's hard to hold hands and drive a wheelchair at the same time and not run over my husband's toes. Just little things. But you know what? We are so fortunate. There is so much that God has done for us. Anybody living in this country, there is so many resources for us. Years ago, if you were disabled, you were in the house and that was it.
That's correct.
And in some ways, you were seen as you must have sinned and done something wrong. And God's mad at you.
Again, correct.
No. And I think of John Erickson Tata.
Yes.
That she did the same thing. She was laying there totally paralyzed. And one night she cried, I can't even kill myself because she couldn't move to do anything and show me how to live. Would we have even known her if she would not have had this happen? I'm not famous like she is, but I try to exemplify God so that when people see me, they're not seeing me, they're seeing God.
I remember another person who was very popular, a little older than I was when I was growing up, but that was Annette Funicello, who also suffered from MS.
Yes.
And
yes.
she had the same kind of epiphany that it was a gift from God.
Yeah.
Super.
Yeah.
So what is your purpose now?
My purpose now?
Yes.
To speak. I have my book for sale on Amazon. It's if you just type in A Matter of Faith, you're going to get a whole lot of things. So it's A Matter of Faith by Joan Patterson. And I want people, I speak more directly with women, to help them see that culture's priorities don't mean anything. It's a love relationship with God. God will get you through more than the culture ever will.
Are you doing your speaking in Pennsylvania or throughout the New England area?
I would love to do it anywhere in the state.
Okay.
I would be glad to go anywhere.
I would think that would be a very strong message for anybody because you have overcome a lot of adversity and you still have to deal with it. And yet you've maintained your faith and you still seek a way to help other people. I think that's admirable.
It's not me, it's God.
Super. Do you have any advice for people over the age of 50 who may need more direction for their lives or a sense of purpose?
Don't wait to do the things that you like. Cherish the time. We're never guaranteed tomorrow. And some people, when I get this amount of money, I'll do this or I'll do that. No, do it now. Find your passion. And if you don't know what your passion is, an afternoon and just take downtime, no phone, no TV, no nothing, just you, and think of what you like to do and what you like to do the best. And if you're not sure, ask your family and friends, because what you like, they'll see it. It'll show in your face, your action. Once you find that, latch on to it. Don't get into the, oh, I'm over 50. I can't do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that's not an excuse. Oh, the older, when you asked about 50, I'm thinking that was many years ago for me. He didn't sound all that old anymore. And sometimes even the MS, yes, slows me down. But now there's some things with the body that is saying, lets me know it's there. That doesn't matter. Do what you can. They tell you if you had in one of those itises like Arthur that seems to invade our older bodies, if you just do nothing, you will be able to do less. The object is to remain active. I had a piano teacher that I think was in her 90s. Her hands were totally gnarled. Her fingers were all out of shape. But it was a joy to hear her play. She would still play the piano. Use what you have. Use your brain. Use your body. Enjoy life. Use this time to be a mentor. I don't have anything. I don't have anything to give anybody. The fact that you've lived this long. We have 2 boys in our church that I get a hug every time we go to church. And they just keep asking questions. You have a lot to give.
I interviewed somebody a couple of years ago who invites teenagers over to her house to put together a puzzle. And that's all they do is they just make a meal and sit down and put together a puzzle. But it's that conversation that they have while having the puzzle, while making the puzzle, that really builds a strong relationship, and she's able to mentor into the young people's lives.
Yeah.
Very good. How can people get in touch with you if they'd like to connect with you?
My website is joanpatterson.org, O-R-G. My email is joan@joanpatterson.org. Very
good. And we'll be sure to link to your book in the show notes and in the feature story that we'll be writing up as well.
Thank you. It's been a joy.
Thank you very much for sharing your story with me. I found it inspirational. I'm sure others will as well. And I just love all the things that seem to happen and doors that seem to open at just the right time to get you what you needed. It's like God always provides.
And I wanted to quit writing because the book just got too hard. And God opened up the doors and gave me a whole crew of people to help out. That was his way of saying, you're not done, Joan.
That's great. Thank you again for sharing your story, Joan. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
I can't imagine what it would feel like to watch as a neurological disease left me more dependent on others for my basic needs. But Joan Patterson experienced that and thrived as she developed an even closer relationship with God. Shortly after being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, Joan relied on a quad cane to get around, especially at the school where she taught. When walking became more difficult, she moved to a 3-wheeled scooter, but that meant her car had to be modified to accommodate it. After 2 scooters wore out, her physical therapist recommended a power wheelchair, which needed a special van for Joan to drive, and it came with a price tag of $160,000. One of her biggest answers to prayer was getting a service dog, which involved multiple miracles in itself. First, her husband, who had been allergic to dogs, tested negative for the allergy. Then, when attending a show for people over 50, Joan met a woman with multiple sclerosis who was using the exact same type of power chair, and she had a poodle sleeping beside her. That's how Joan found out about Canine Partners for Life and scheduled an interview. During that interview, she discovered it would require a wait ranging from 6 to 18 months for Joan and a dog to be trained to work together. In faith, she submitted an application. A few months later, Joan got a call out of the blue from the agency announcing a service dog had unexpectedly become available. Ironically, its name was Faith. Joan wrote a book recalling her experiences in contending with multiple sclerosis, getting her service dog, and growing closer to God in the process. The book is titled A Matter of Faith, Surviving Life's Crises with 4 Wheels, 4 Paws, and a Loving God, and it's available on Amazon and in other bookstores. People can connect with Joan by visiting her website at www.joanpatterson.org or by email at joan@joanpatterson.org. That's all I have for this week's show. If you'd like help in identifying a purpose for your life or to get help planning your next steps, I'm offering a complimentary brainstorming session to members of the Forward from 50 Facebook community. For details, connect with me on Facebook or visit forwardfrom50.com. I'll have another inspirational interview on the next episode of the Forward from 50 podcast. Thanks for listening. If you like this show, please consider leaving a review wherever you download the episodes.